Hi, my name is Keade. 24 hours after my wedding, the restaurant called and said, "We reviewed the security footage. You need to come alone. Don't tell your wife." I remember staring at the ring on my finger, still believing I was the luckiest man alive. I almost laughed. I almost didn't go. But when the screen turned on, I finally understood why they needed me alone. Because the woman smiling beside me wasn't planning a future with me. And the man standing next to her, quiet, confident, in control, was my own brother. That was the moment I learned the truth. Some betrayals don't end marriages. They erase entire lives. I woke before the alarm, the way people do when they believe their life has finally settled into place. Morning light slid through the blinds of our Chicago apartment, soft and forgiving. The city hadn't started shouting yet. Everything felt paused. I lay there for a moment, listening to my own breathing, then turned my hand over and stared at the ring on my finger. It still felt strange, heavy in a good way, like proof. Some men wait their whole lives to feel chosen. I kept thinking that. Not with pride, with disbelief. I got up quietly, made coffee, let it drip slow. The apartment smelled like roasted beans and new beginnings. Anya wasn't there. She'd said she needed space the night before. Too much noise, too many people, a hotel near the river, just to rest. I'd nodded, kissed her cheek, told her to take all the time she needed. That's who I've always been. The one who doesn't push. My phone buzzed on the counter. I smiled when I saw an unfamiliar number. I was still in that phase where every interruption felt like congratulations. "Mr. Vale?" A woman's voice. Calm. Careful. "Yes. This is Lila. I manage the restaurant where your wedding was held. There's something you need to see." I laughed softly. "If this is about a charge, it's not. Please come in person, and come alone. Don't tell your wife." The silence after she said that felt longer than it was. I drove downtown with the radio off. Traffic moved the way it always did, indifferent to private disasters. I told myself this was probably nothing. A misplaced envelope, a billing mistake. Maybe someone had complained. My mind reached for ordinary explanations because it wasn't ready for anything else. Only later did the details start to feel wrong. Anya hadn't answered my texts that morning. The way she'd avoided my eyes after the rehearsal dinner. How Julian had clapped me on the back a little too hard and said, "You did good, little brother." Like I'd passed some test. At the restaurant, Lila met me by the service entrance. No smile, no small talk. She led me past the empty dining room, chairs stacked, flowers already wilting, down a narrow hallway that smelled like cleaning solution and last night's champagne. The back office was dim, a single screen mounted on the wall. A desk pushed aside, like the room itself had made space for what was coming. "I shouldn't be involved," she said quietly, handing me the remote. "But if it were me, I'd want to know." I pressed play. At first, I didn't recognize the angle. A security camera. Grainy. Then I saw the timestamp. The night before the wedding. Anya stepped into frame, laughing. Julian followed her in. Too close, too familiar. They disappeared into a supply room, and when the door closed behind them, something in my chest tightened. The audio was clear. "He'll never see it coming," Julian said. "You just smile and walk down that aisle." Anya laughed, not nervous, not unsure. "You worry too much," she said. "He trusts me." Then she kissed him. The remote slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body felt like it had been unplugged. I expected something louder inside me. Anger, panic. Instead, there was nothing. A hollow space where certainty used to live. "How long?" I asked without looking away from the frozen image on the screen. Lila shook her head. "Long enough to plan." I nodded, thanked her. The words came out polite, automatic. I walked out the same way I'd walked in, past the empty tables, into the noise of the street. The drive home felt unreal, like I was watching someone else hold the wheel. Back at the apartment, I didn't call Anya. I didn't text Julian. I stepped onto the balcony, the city spread out below me, and finally took the ring off. I set it on the railing, watched it catch the light. It felt like a promise made to someone who never existed. She said she needed a moment alone before the wedding. Now I wonder if that moment was to laugh at me. I hadn't slept. Just sat in the dim kitchen with the same cold cup of coffee from hours ago. The city outside was beginning to wake. Horns, garbage trucks, runners in pairs. Normal things. But in my head, everything was looping. At some point, I pulled open the drawer next to the fridge. I wasn't looking for anything specific, maybe just trying to feel something ordinary. And there it was, the menu from the rehearsal dinner. Thick cardstock, gold lettering, but right there, staring at me from the top corner like a bad joke, my name, spelled wrong, Keade Vale. I remember shrugging it off that night. Someone had even joked, "Hey, at least they got the V right." But it stuck with me. Probably because it wasn't the first time. All through school, it had been Kyle or Keade or just the quiet one. Forgotten. Faded behind someone else's shine. That night, what should have been a celebration had already been chipped at, moment by moment. I closed my eyes and let the memory come back. The rooftop venue was beautiful. Warm lights strung from beam to beam. Long tables lined with candles. But when I walked in, I didn't see my name. Not on the first table, not the second. Anya was talking to the photographer near the bar. Julian stood beside her, looking like he owned the place. I hovered a moment, unsure. A waiter glanced over, saw my confusion, and gestured toward the far wall. "There's one open there," he said, pointing near the storage closet. "I thought you were with the media team." Media team. I ended up squeezed between the photographer's assistant and a cousin I hadn't seen in 12 years. I could barely see Anya through the flowers. When I caught Julian's eye across the room, he smirked and raised his glass. "Guess we know who's camera shy," he called out. People laughed, not loud. Just enough to make the back of my neck warm. I thought it was an accident. Seating charts are chaotic, right? But now, looking back, no. That wasn't chaos. That was deliberate. Later that night, after dinner, I'd planned to give a short toast. Nothing grand, just a thank you to everyone who came. Something to honor our families. I stood, glass in hand, heart beating a little faster than usual. Anya placed her hand gently on my arm. "Let my father speak first," she whispered. So I sat. After her dad's long-winded monologue about love and legacy, I rose again. This time, Julian cut me off completely, stood with his wine glass, and launched into a speech about how Anya had brought life to our family, how he'd known she was special the moment he met her. By the time he finished, the staff was clearing plates. My moment had vanished, and I'd let it. Back in the present, I got up from the table and walked to the balcony. The air was cooler now, sharp. I leaned against the railing, phone in hand, scrolling through nothing. Then I remembered something else from that night. Anya had said she'd meet me out on the balcony. "Just a minute," she smiled. "I'll bring you wine." She never came. But Julian did. He brought 2 glasses, one already half full. He clinked mine without asking and said, "Enjoy the peace, little brother. After tomorrow, things won't ever be this calm again." At the time, I'd thought it was one of those vague married life jokes. Now it sounded like a closing statement, a warning, maybe even a celebration. I stepped back inside and pulled open the credenza drawer where we kept cards and leftover favors. There, folded and pressed beneath a stack of ribboned envelopes, was a napkin, forest green, embroidered in white thread, Mr. Vale. For a second, I felt a flicker of warmth, until I remembered. That napkin had been placed at Julian's seat. Mine had been plain, picked from the extras by the bar, where the latecomers were told to help themselves. So why had the personalized one, the one with my name, been laid at my brother's place? I ran my thumb across the stitching. The thread tugged slightly, like it didn't belong. They said I was seated where the sun would hit just right for the photos, but the shadows didn't lie. I stood there for a moment after thinking that, still holding the napkin, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. Then I folded it once, carefully, and set it back in the drawer. I didn't want to destroy anything yet. I wanted to understand it. I went to the fridge and poured a small glass of wine. The bottle made a dull sound against the shelf, louder than it should have been in the quiet. When I closed the door, something slipped loose from under the corner magnet and drifted down, brushing my hand on the way. A white envelope. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. Rounded letters. Careful. The kind she used when she didn't want to make mistakes. I stared at it longer than I meant to. I remembered her pressing it into my palm the night before the wedding, just outside the hotel ballroom. Music spilling through the doors. People laughing behind us. "Not now," she'd said softly. "Read it after, when you're ready." I'd smiled and tucked it into my jacket, assuming it was something sentimental. Advice. A blessing. I forgot about it the moment Julian called my name and waved me over like a child being summoned. Now the envelope felt heavier than paper. I carried the wine to the kitchen table and sat down. The chair scraped slightly against the floor. I turned the envelope over once, then again, before breaking the seal. Inside was a single page. No date, no greeting. She didn't waste time. "I don't know how to say this out loud," she wrote, "so I'm writing it instead." That line alone made my chest tighten. She talked about how proud she was of me, about how I had always been steady, dependable, the one who didn't demand space. So space was never made for him. Then her words shifted, subtle but unmistakable. "Julian has always taken up more air in a room than he needs," she wrote. "And Anya, she listens to that kind of confidence." My fingers curled against the paper. She said she'd noticed how close they'd become. Too many shared looks, too many private jokes. She said when she tried to mention it, she was told she was imagining things, being dramatic, seeing problems where there were none. "I learned a long time ago what happens when I push back," she wrote. "Silence was easier. Maybe that makes me weak." I didn't feel angry at first, just tired, like a door I'd leaned against my whole life had finally opened, and there was nothing behind it. Near the bottom, she wrote, "Build a door, Keade. Not just walls. Walls keep people out, but they also keep you trapped inside." She signed it simply, Mom. I folded the letter once, then again, smoothing the creases. The wine sat untouched. I wasn't ready for anything that softened the edges. I looked around the kitchen. 4 chairs. Only one pulled out. I thought of all the dinners where Julian talked over me, where decisions were made before I even knew there was a conversation. How often my mother had watched, quiet, hands folded. She hadn't protected me, but she'd seen it. That mattered more than I wanted it to. I stood, walked to the living room, and opened the old photo album we kept on the bottom shelf, the one labeled Family. I slipped the letter between 2 pages and closed it. Then, on the inside cover, I wrote a new line in pen. Truths we weren't allowed to say. I said it out loud once, just to hear it. My voice didn't shake. You all wanted silence, I said to the empty room. Let's see what mine sounds like. They erased my voice long ago, but they forgot I still know how to write. The apartment was quiet again, but this time it felt intentional, like silence was finally taking my side. I stood at the kitchen counter with my laptop open, staring at the blinking cursor in my email search bar. The phrase in my head had been looping for hours. They erased my voice long ago, but they forgot I still know how to write. And now it was time to find proof. I typed slowly, Julian, mortgage help. The folder popped up instantly, like it had just been waiting for me to finally come looking. The subject lines hadn't changed since the day he sent them, dry and transactional, almost like I wasn't family. Need your credit to secure the loan. Just a formality. Thanks again, little bro. I clicked on the thread. The PDF was still there. I remembered the night we signed it. Julian had cleared his kitchen table, poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and said, You're the reason we can afford this. You know that? Back then, that sentence made me feel proud. Now it made my stomach turn. The original document loaded slowly. I already knew what I'd see, but my eyes still scanned every line, needing confirmation from something official. There it was. My name, Keade Vale, listed beneath Julian's and Anya's, co-buyer, signed and dated. I closed my eyes and exhaled. That was real. That had happened. But something else had too. Back at the top of the thread, I noticed an attachment I hadn't seen before. Not in that thread, just sitting there, newly time-stamped. Document_update_final.pdf, no subject, no message, just the file. I clicked it. It opened faster than the first, like it couldn't wait to show itself. And then, my name was gone. Only 2 names sat at the top, Julian Vale and Anya Benson. No co-buyer. No signature line for me. Not even a placeholder. Just absence. I scrolled to the bottom, hoping it was a draft. Maybe they just removed it before re-adding me later. But the signature page told the truth, louder than any shout ever could. Where my signature once sat, the space was clean, like I'd never been there at all. 2 names signed, dated, finalized, 2 weeks before the wedding. I blinked at the screen, trying to make sense of how something so simple could feel like a gut punch. This wasn't just about love anymore. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, calculated, papered, sealed, and worse, it was easy. A sudden memory surfaced, uninvited. A call I got from the lender about a month ago. A woman had asked, Mr. Vale, just confirming, are you still involved with the property at 17th and Alcott? I remember being confused. I said, yes, why wouldn't I be? She'd paused for a second, then said, all right, thank you. That was it. They never followed up. I never thought to question it. Now I understood. They didn't need to follow up, because by then I was already gone, on paper and in their plans. My hand hovered over the mouse, shaking. I didn't want to print it. I didn't want to see it physically exist, but I needed to. 2 documents came out of the printer, one with my name, one without. I laid them on the kitchen counter like exhibits in a courtroom only I was sitting in. The weight of it wasn't in the ink, it was in the silence, in the ease of it all, in how quiet it had been to disappear. I opened a drawer and pulled out pushpins, the same ones I used for birthday cards and grocery coupons, but tonight they were for something else. I tacked both documents side by side on the corkboard by the fridge, 1 year apart. Same apartment, different reality. I stood back and stared. "This is what trust looks like when it's exploited," I whispered. And then, quietly, I reached for a pen and labeled the left one, what I signed, and the right one, what they used. I went to the living room, pulled out a USB drive, and started scanning the files into a new folder on my desktop. I named it Veil Evidence. It felt ridiculous at first, like I was starting some kind of battle that didn't belong to me. But then again, maybe it always did. The anger wasn't explosive. It didn't come like a fire. It came like ice. Cold. Controlled. Measured. I opened a blank document, titled it Statement. Not for court, not for lawyers, not yet, but for me. At the top I typed, passive doesn't mean permission. Silence doesn't mean consent. And below it, I wrote one more line. If they're going to write me out, then I'll make sure the final page is mine to write. The email had barely closed on my screen before I reached for my phone. Not to call Julian, not to confront Anya, but to send a message I never thought I'd type. Still around? The reply came seconds later. Always. Thought you forgot. There was no need to say more. I knew where to meet him. The cafe hadn't changed much. Still tucked into the corner of a quiet downtown block, with its chipped brick walls and 2 sweet pastries behind glass. Rafi Khan sat in the corner booth, the one we used to crowd into when things were simpler. Back then, it was all design briefs and late-night brainstorming. Now it was something else entirely. He stood as I approached, not quite smiling, but not guarded either, just watchful, like someone who'd been hurt, and finally learned where to aim that hurt. "I appreciate you making time," I said. "Didn't think you'd ever ask," he replied, sliding a cup of coffee across the table toward me. Black, no sugar. He remembered. There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy. The kind of silence that knows exactly what it's walking into. "He did it to me too," Rafi said before I could say a word. I blinked. "Julian?" He nodded slowly. "Changed launch timelines, rewrote project scopes, and always made sure it was me who looked unprepared. I once found out we'd pitched a whole campaign under my name, and when it failed, he pinned the timeline on me. Client swallowed it. So did Anya. I hadn't realized I was gripping my coffee cup so tightly until I felt the heat bite my skin. I tried to defend myself," Rafi went on. "Told her the truth, showed her email logs. She just said, 'I'm sure Julian had a reason.' That was it. No curiosity, no questions." I stared at him. "And you just walked away?" "No," he said, dry. "I just stopped running after doors that never planned to open." There was a silence. I let it stretch, unsure where to place the ache that had started forming under my ribs. Then Rafi leaned forward, his voice lower. "You ever wonder how he always seemed one step ahead of you? I didn't answer. He rehearsed, he said. Before meetings, he'd run through what you might say. I've seen him in the mirror, practicing his replies, testing out ways to make you sound unsure, slipping in phrases that'd make you doubt yourself when you repeated them. I swallowed hard. You're joking. He shook his head. He studied your tone, man, your hesitation. He wasn't just mocking you. He was training for the version of you that suited him. It hit like a slap across memory. Suddenly, every moment, every time I'd stumbled in front of our team, every time I'd walked away thinking I'd overreacted or misunderstood, felt like it had been written in advance. Not by me, by him. Rafi leaned back. Julian doesn't erase people because they're weak. He erases the ones who make him feel smaller. My throat went dry. Why didn't you ever tell me? You weren't ready to hear it, he said. And maybe I wasn't ready to be the guy who said it. The server dropped off our check. I reached for it out of habit. Rafi stopped me gently. This one's on me. You've already paid enough. We stood. No hug, just a handshake. Firm, brief. But something passed between us. Not closure, just clarity. I slid the receipt into my coat pocket, not because I needed it, but because something about it felt worth keeping. A record, a line in the sand. The walk home was long, not in distance, but in weight. I passed a bookstore, the same one where I once bought Julian a leather-bound notebook. He never used it. Said he preferred digital. I thought about that for a moment. Thought about how many gifts I'd given over the years. Patience, time, silence. How many moments I'd swallowed because family comes first. How many lies I'd let slip by, thinking confrontation would just make things worse. But worse for who? I stopped outside my building and stared at the glass door. My reflection looked tired, older. Not from age, but from understanding. I used to think silence kept the peace, I muttered, but all it ever did was keep their story clean. By the time I got home, the sky had turned the kind of gray that doesn't promise rain, just resignation. I dropped my coat on the back of the kitchen chair and stared at the hallway closet like it owed me something. I didn't go in right away. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, listening to the hum of the fridge and the soft tick of the wall clock. Then I opened the safe. It was tucked behind a row of old tax folders and a weathered box of family photos. I hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside, under a manila envelope labeled Car Title 2017, was the external hard drive. Black, dusty, heavier than I remembered. I had nearly forgotten it existed. I'd bought it to back up video files, especially the ones I cared about, including the footage from our engagement dinner. I'd recorded that night, thinking it would be something I'd want to revisit one day. A time capsule of celebration, of family, of love. Funny how naive you sound when you play back your own voice, smiling into a camera that saw more than you did. I plugged it in and waited for the green light to blink on. The folder structure came up instantly. I scrolled until I found it. Engagement dinner, March. I double-clicked. The video opened full screen. The audio crackled for a second, then settled. I saw myself, slightly out of focus, standing at the end of a long table, raising a glass. "Thank you for being here tonight," I said. My voice was thinner than I remembered. To love and to family. Clinks of silverware, laughter, a soft jazz track playing over hidden ceiling speakers. The camera had been set on a small tripod on the sideboard, angled to catch the whole room, not artfully, just enough to archive the moment. But then it caught more. At the center of the table, Anya leaned toward Julian, their heads close. Her hand brushed his under the tablecloth. My stomach tensed. Julian whispered something. I turned up the volume and replayed it. "Your poker face is perfect," he said. Anya smiled. "So is your plan." I froze the frame. Her face was turned slightly toward him, eyes bright, not with affection for me, but with collusion. I remembered thinking, that night, how distracted she'd seemed, how she barely touched her food, how she laughed harder at Julian's jokes than at mine. I hit play again. Julian. The guy's in love. He thinks this is his legacy project. Anya. By the time he figures it out, we'll already be listed as joint owners. Clink. Their glasses touched. I paused the video again. The rest of the room had blurred into background chatter. But that moment was crystalline, cold, precise, and more damning than any confrontation could have been. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. In the upper corner of the frame, I saw myself, smiling, turning to speak to a waiter, not knowing, not even looking in their direction, just existing, quietly, politely, in the margins of my own life. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just reached for the mouse, dragged the timeline back 10 seconds, and hit the export button. The file saved under a new name, dinner_capture_raw. When it finished, I unplugged the hard drive and placed it gently on the table. Then I opened a fresh folder on my desktop, named it in all caps, Evidence, Veil. I transferred the file, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was unraveling. I felt like I was documenting. I looked down at my hands, still steady, still quiet, but something had shifted beneath the skin, like a wire tightening just enough to hold its shape. Because this wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was data, proof. And this time, when I speak, it won't be a warning. It'll be a record. The receptionist barely looked up when I stepped in. A calm smile, a clipboard, a pen that barely clicked. "Mr. Vale?" she asked. I nodded. She gestured toward the frosted glass hallway. "Mr. Harper will see you in 10. Water or coffee while you wait?" "No, thank you." My voice was steady, maybe too steady, like I was trying to sound like someone who had walked into a place like this before. The waiting room was muted, soft gray chairs, quiet jazz humming from somewhere invisible. I didn't sit. I just stood near the window, staring out at the city like it might offer answers. Midtown pulsed quietly below, everyone rushing through their own chaos. Meanwhile, I was here to sort out mine, not to sue. Not yet. I just had a question. 10 minutes later, I was ushered into an office lined with legal texts and quiet restraint. Mr. Royce Harper stood as I entered, a man in his early 60s with calm, intelligent eyes and the kind of composure that made you think he'd seen the worst parts of people and didn't flinch anymore. "Mr. Vale," he said, extending a hand. "Let's talk." I sat across from him, told him everything. Not all at once, but piece by piece, starting with the deed. The names missing, the documents that looked official but left me erased. Then I told him about the video. I expected him to ask why I waited. He didn't. He listened, took notes, only paused to ask for clarification. No judgment in his tone, just precision. When I finished, there was a silence between us that felt heavier than the story itself. "You waited," he said finally. "Too long, maybe, but not too late." I didn't know what to say to that. He tapped his pen once against the desk. I've seen this before. Not the exact betrayal, but the pattern. Quiet sons, stronger brothers, families that confuse silence for consent. He leaned back in his chair and glanced at the printouts I'd brought. You're asking the right questions, but I'm going to be blunt with you. Please do. In family law, documentation is everything. Emotion doesn't win hearings. Paper trails do. And in your case, this video, the financial documents, your email threads, they're strong. They build something. I stayed quiet, letting his words settle. But, he continued, if you stay silent, if you don't act, formally or informally, then legally, your silence is interpreted as agreement. I blinked. Even if I didn't sign anything? Especially if you didn't speak up, he said. Courts don't reward quiet dignity. They reward documented dissent. If your name disappeared and you said nothing, on paper, in writing, then it looks like you agreed. It hit harder than I expected. I'd spent years thinking restraint was noble, that not reacting was the way to avoid adding fire to dysfunction. But here, now it sounded like I'd been helping them win. He must have seen something shift in my face because he added, silence might feel like strength, Mr. Vale, but in law and in families like this, it's just a locked door someone else holds the key to. I sat with that. A long time. He offered me a legal strategy. We walked through possible options. Not lawsuits yet, just leverage. A formal notice of dispute. Quiet, clean pressure. Something that said, I know what you did, and I'm no longer your secret to bury. When the conversation ended, I stood, shook his hand. Mr. Harper, I asked, if I released the video publicly, not through the courts, what would happen? He tilted his head. Well, sometimes the legal path isn't the loudest one, but it should be the cleanest. I nodded. I'm not here to start a fire. I just want the smoke to point to the right room. On the way out, I passed the same receptionist. She smiled again. Same tone, same question. All good, Mr. Vale. I paused. No, I said, but I'm getting there. Outside, the sky had turned overcast. Wind brushed past my collar. I pulled it tighter and walked 3 blocks without even realizing I hadn't decided where to go next. And then I did. I turned right, toward a place I hadn't been since the engagement dinner. This time, I wasn't there to raise a glass. I was there to find the person who kept the original security footage. They thought the meeting ended when I stood up. It didn't. It started when I walked out. I didn't use the front entrance. The same doorway where I'd once stood with a bouquet in hand, waiting to celebrate my future, felt off limits now. So I took the service stairwell, quiet, plain, unadorned, a hallway meant for those who carried the weight of other people's moments, not those who celebrated their own. But tonight wasn't about celebration. It was about something far colder and far more permanent. The private dining room upstairs looked exactly as it had months ago. Clean linens, soft lighting, the faint scent of polished wood and citrus. Only this time, I wasn't seated at the edge of the table, ignored and half visible. I had the head seat. A laptop rested in front of me, closed for now. Beside it, a slim folder. Inside, every copy, every timestamp, every document they thought would stay buried. The door clicked open. Julian walked in first, all smirking charm and loosened tie. Anya followed, glancing around like she'd walked into the wrong movie. You wanted to talk? Julian asked, cocking his head. I assumed this was a peace thing. I didn't answer. Just opened the laptop. The screen lit up. A flicker of motion, clinking glasses. My own voice, faint but clear, welcoming guests to our engagement dinner. Julian's posture shifted the second his voice followed mine on screen. There it was, his hand brushing against Anya's under the table. "You're getting good at this," he whispered on the video. "Your poker face is perfect." Anya smiled. "So is your plan." I watched them, on screen and in person. Anya didn't blink. Julian sat up straighter, but his eyes narrowed. "You brought a recording? From that night?" "I didn't have to," I said quietly. "The restaurant kept a copy. Standard retention protocol." Julian turned to the manager, who stood silently by the door, arms crossed. "They said you requested deletion," the manager replied evenly. "But we don't erase footage until 30 days after an event. You missed the window. You just didn't know that until now." Back on the screen, Julian's voice cut in again. "The guy's in love. Thinks this is his legacy project. By the time he figures it out, we'll already be listed as joint owners." Then a toast. Then laughter. Then stillness. I closed the laptop, reached into the folder. 2 documents slid across the table, one bearing all 3 of our names, the original property agreement I'd signed with trust in my bones, and the second, dated 2 weeks before the wedding, listing only Julian and Anya. No signature from me, no consent, just erasure. Julian didn't look down. His hand stayed perfectly still. Anya finally spoke. This doesn't change." I raised a hand. Calm. Final. "I'm not here for debate." Then came the last paper. Sealed, notarized, time-stamped, filed. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet. But it was a public declaration of misrepresentation and material concealment, attached to a disclosure form I'd sent to our mutual lender, our tax preparer, and, as of 2 hours ago, the family attorney. I slid it toward Julian like a chess piece across a polished board. "Everything you two built on my name," I said, voice steady. "We'll have to stand without it now. Let's see what holds." Julian exhaled through his nose, a puff of frustration masked as indifference. He leaned back like he was trying to find a more comfortable angle from which to regain control. "I mean, you're really going to blow it all up? Over what? Some emotional misfire? Some video taken out of context?" I met his eyes. "I'm not here for your apology," I said. "I'm here for my name." He had nothing. Anya looked away. The manager nodded, subtle, almost invisible, and left the room. I stood, folded the documents carefully, tucked them into my coat, walked to the door. They stayed seated. That part made sense. People who've built their world on your silence never know how to stand when you finally stop being quiet. As the door closed behind me, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't care what they did next, but because I already knew. By the time the doors closed behind me, the truth was already louder than anything they'd ever said about me. The morning after the restaurant meeting was quieter than I expected. No calls, no emails, no "we should talk" messages from anyone. Just stillness. I stood at the kitchen counter, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. The chair across from me, hers, sat untouched. That used to bother me. Now it reminded me of something I couldn't quite name. Not absence, not regret. Maybe just relief. I took a long breath and said out loud, "I didn't lose a wife. I just stopped mistaking a mirror for a partner." And somehow, that landed heavier than anything they'd ever said to me. It was a Saturday. Miles had slept in. His blanket twisted around his legs like he'd wrestled something in his dreams and barely made it out. When he wandered out in his dinosaur pajamas, blinking against the soft morning light, I looked at him and saw everything they hadn't been able to touch. "Want to feed the ducks today?" I asked. He nodded and grabbed his jacket without saying a word. He didn't need to. He always loved the ducks. We walked the 3 blocks to the neighborhood pond. The wind was crisp but forgiving. A few leaves still clung to the trees like they hadn't gotten the memo that fall was over. We sat on our usual bench, the one furthest from the playground. Miles tossed small pieces of bread into the water while I watched his eyes track each ripple. After a while, he asked, "Why don't we see Uncle Julian anymore?" His voice was quiet, curious, no accusation in it, just a kid trying to piece his world together. I didn't flinch. "Because sometimes," I said, choosing each word carefully, "even family forgets how to be kind." He blinked, thoughtful, then nodded like that made sense. But I wasn't done. I looked at him, really looked at him, and added, "But I want you to remember this more than anything else. You never have to stay quiet to be loved. Ever." That one he didn't respond to right away. He just leaned his head against my arm and kept tossing crumbs into the pond. Later that afternoon, I drove past the restaurant. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down. Just glanced at it in the rearview mirror. The same doors they once walked through with my name on their guest list, now closed behind them. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt done. As the sun dipped low, I passed by the apartment building, the one I'd once co-signed, the one I thought would be our home. I turned down the side street instead. There was no point staring at a building that never carried my name the way it should have. Peace, I realized, wasn't something that showed up with a big announcement. It was subtle. It crept in through the cracks when the noise died down. Back home, I tucked Miles into bed. He asked if we could go to the park again tomorrow. I told him yes. After I turned off the light, I stood by the door for a while, watching him breathe. His chest rose and fell like the world outside didn't know how to touch him yet. And I planned to keep it that way for as long as I could. Before I headed to bed, I opened the drawer by my desk. There it was, still folded. The coffee receipt from the day I met Rafi. I hadn't thrown it out. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed something tangible. A timestamp for the moment the silence cracked. I smiled. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering I wasn't crazy. I was just quiet too long. And tomorrow, I'd wake up with no secrets left to carry. This wasn't vengeance. This was truth, made visible. And it was final.